Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Adriel Boals of Hobnob Games. This is our 5th tutorial of our intermediate series. As always, you can find us at hobnob.games, where you can find this tutorial along with all of our tutorials, and where you can also download and play on our poker app. So today we're going to do a game film session together. In our last tutorial, I talked about how coaches will oftentimes study game film of their opponents to be prepared and learn their strengths, weaknesses, and tendencies. And I said in poker, this is equally as important. We need to constantly watch game film to get inside the head of our enemies, to know thy enemy. And a great way to do this is to pay attention to the action at the table, even when we're not in the hand, to mentally replay the entire hand from each player's perspective, once we know what cards they were holding, and then extrapolate from this information. So we're going to practice this together today by kind of watching the game film on a hand at our table. So imagine that this is a 2-5 cash game with $500 effective stacks, so pretty standard. Everyone's got 100 big blinds, and you get dealt 2 trash cards, so you just fold. But you're not going to pay attention to the TV. You're not going to pay attention to your phone. You're not going to check out the cute cocktail waitresses. We're going to do game film study. We're going to watch the action, watch our opponents. So pre-flop. Pre-flop we watch, and under the gun +1 just limps, so they call for $5. Middle position 1 calls, middle position 2 calls, the person in the cutoff calls, the small blind folds, and the big blind just checks their option. Okay, so nothing too interesting here pre-flop. We have 4 players going to the flop in a limped pot. So because the pot is limped, I'm imagining no one's got pocket aces or pocket kings or anything too strong, or there likely would have been at least 1 raise. So now the pot is $25 going to the flop, and the flop comes queen, 8, 7. The top 2 are hearts. Okay, so now the big blind just checks. The person who open limped, under the gun +1, bets $20 into this $25 pot. Okay, middle position 1 calls the $20 bet. Middle position 2 calls the bet. And now the person in the cutoff raises the $60. Okay, this hand started off kind of boring pre-flop, but suddenly has gotten much more exciting. So we got some action going on this particular flop. So we definitely want to be paying attention. We then notice that after the cutoff raises the $60, the big blind just folds. The under the gun +1 calls. Middle position 1 folds, so they're out of the hand. And middle position 2 calls. Okay, we got an interesting hand going on here. So now going to the turn, there's now $265 in the pot. And the turn card is kind of a blank, 3 diamonds. You know, the flush doesn't get there, no straights get there, so we missed all of our draws. It's not an overcard, this is kind of just a brick card. Everyone just checks. Okay, that's kind of interesting. We had an awful lot of action going on the flop, but with this kind of brick turn, everyone just checks. On the river, there's still $265 in the pot. That did not change because everyone checked. And we get the 5 of clubs. So the 5 of clubs, you know, so all the flush draws brick out. If someone did flop open-ended with 6-9, they just got there. But 6-9 is not really a hand that people play a lot. Although considered it was just a limped pot, that's entirely possible. So it's a possibility someone has 6-9 here, but not very likely. And under the gun +1 bets $150. So just a little bit more than a half pot size bet. Middle position 1 calls, okay. Middle position 2 folds, and the cutoff, who did the raise on the flop, also folds. Okay, but now I'm excited because we get the showdown. Like I said, every hand that I'm watching, I'm praying it gets the showdown, so the players are forced to flip their cards over, and I get to see what cards were they holding throughout all this action. So we're at showdown. And under the gun +1 shows pocket kings. And the person in middle position 1 who called the bet shows pocket jacks. All right, so I get to see their hands. So it's time to extrapolate. We want to figure out, we want to replay this entire, the entire hand from each player's perspective. So let's start with the first player, the under the gun +1. We now know that the whole time this player had pocket kings. Now we know that the player had pocket kings. We're going to replay the entire hand from this person's perspective. So pre-flop, they get dealt pocket kings, and they're the first acting. It's full to them, and they raise to $20. Then they see a flop of queen 8-7 with 2 hearts, and they're first to act. So this player's playing out of position, and they immediately c-bet $20 into the $25 pot. And then after a couple of calls and then the cutoffs raised to $60, the person then called an additional $40 raise. When the turn came to 3 of diamonds, this player was first to act and just checked. And on the river, this player then decided to make just a little bit over a half size pot size bet at $150. So let's extrapolate. What can we take away from this game film that we now have on this player? Well, one thing is, pre-flop, there's really not much to learn about this player, not much to extrapolate. It's pretty standard. They had pocket kings, it was checked to them, and they raised with pocket kings. But I also could extrapolate, this player's really not that easily scared post-flop, because when this player was facing a raise, did not fold to the raise. Now, in this player's defense, you had an overpair to the board. There's a lot of draws out there that someone could be raising with, and the raise size wasn't that big. It was only an additional $40. They're getting pretty good odds. So I'm going to be watching this player again in the future to say, okay, I know this player is not easily scared, but what would it take to scare this player off of the flop? How much fold equity could I potentially have? I don't have a definitive answer to that question yet. I just have a start to my answer. I'm going to need more game film on this particular player to get a better, more clear answer to this question. And the river bet is kind of an interesting one. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it quite yet. It could be a blocker bet. And for those of you who don't know, a blocker bet is where someone is first to act and they're afraid of facing a very large bet. So they don't want to see a large bet, so they make a blocker bet. They make a relatively small bet size to try to block someone else from making a very large bet. So was this kind of $150 bet on the river a blocker bet to try to block his opponents from making a larger bet? Or it could have been a thin value. Maybe this person says, well, everyone just checked on the blank turn and the river is another blank. Maybe I can get some value out of ace queen or king queen. And so maybe this player is very good at betting for thin value. I don't know yet. Again, I'm going to continue to watch this player, watch their future hands, get more game film on this player before I know, is this player doing a blocker bet or is this player very good at thin value betting? Now let's do the exact same thing, but for our other opponent. So we have some game film now on middle position number 1 that we now know had pocket jacks the whole time. So let's replay this entire hand from this person's perspective. Pre-flop, he was in middle position, had 2 jacks, and there was a single raise. And he did not 3-bet. To me, that's going to be a point of interest. He just called the $20 raise with pocket jacks. On the flop, he faced, fairly draw-heavy board and 1 overcard. And when someone bet $20, the original raiser C-bet, he was not deterred. He called this bet. And then when the cutoff raised to 60, similar to the person with pocket kings, was not deterred. Of course, was also getting pretty good pot odds and called the additional $40. On the turn, when it got a blank, the first player checked. This player also checked. And now on the river, when it was also another blank, when a person who was not the raiser, not the cutoff who raised on the flop, but the original raiser pre-flop, bets $150, this player calls the bet with pocket jacks. All right, so let's extrapolate. What have we learned about this player? Well, one, I think the pre-flop action is important here. The fact that this player did not 3-bet with pocket jacks tells me this player does not 3-bet very loose. So in the future, if I see this player 3-bet, I can be fairly confident he's got a hand stronger than pocket jacks. It's at least probably pocket queens. Another thing I've learned about this player is that this player is very loose post-flop. Doesn't necessarily need top pair to continue in the hand. So this player does not scare very easily. And in general, I would say this is a very loose passive player. So especially because this player called the $150 bet on the river with pocket jacks, suggests this player is pretty loose passive. So you're bluffing at this player is probably a bad idea. He's going to call you down. So this is actually, I'm going to want to play lots of pots with this player. If I know this player is going to be in the hand, I want to be in the hand too. I don't necessarily need the strongest hand ever to go up against this player because he's not going to put me in tough spots. He's not very aggressive with his pocket jacks. He didn't 3-bet with them. So he's probably not going to put you in difficult decisions, but he will call you down with medium strength hands. That means don't try to bluff with the guy a whole lot, but if you make a hand, then don't hesitate. Fire large bets at this guy and he'll probably call you down. this is one of the most profitable types of players to play against. If I didn't watch the action in his hand, if I was watching the game on TV instead, I would have no idea that the player in middle position 1 is an extremely profitable player that I want to play lots of hands against, and exactly how I want to play against this player. That's why it's so important to watch this film study. Now, the person in the cutoff, we did not get to see this person's cards at Showdown, so I don't know everything. I don't have quite as much game film on this player as I'd like, but I still think that we have some information. So even though I don't know which 2 cards, I know that this player in late position called a raise of $20 after multiple callers. Then on a draw heavy board, then raised a C bet to $60. On the turn when it bricked, just checked, even though this person was last to act. And on the river, when there was a bet and a call, this player then folded to essentially just a little over a half pot size bet. So let's extrapolate. What can we learn from this player? Well, one, it's most likely this player had a draw. There were lots of draws on this board that would make sense that this player would have pre-flop. So any 2 hearts could have had a heart draw. 9-10 is open-ended. 6-9 is open-ended. 5-6 is open-ended. And these are all the types of hands that pre-flop would make sense because there was no raise. And then when none of those draws got there, except for the 6-9, then the player shut down and folded. So I'd say, one, this player probably had a draw and then played the flop very aggressive with the draw, but not overly aggressive, because when the turn and the river were bricks, this player completely shut down. So they'll maybe take 1 aggressive stab, but then when it doesn't work, then they shut down their aggression. And I'd also say the bet sizing was pretty weak, because on the flop, when they decided to raise, well, we had a bet of $20 and some calls, and then just raised to 60. It is kind of your standard 3x, so 3 times the size of the raise, but the fact that there are multiple callers of that means that this raise size needs to be much larger. So raising to only 60 in this situation is a fairly weak bet size. And usually if a player has weak bet sizing, they're a weak player. So again, I need more game film on this player. I'm going to continue to watch the action and watch this player in the future, but at least I have some hypotheses about this player and their overall poker strategy that I can draw from. So if you continually do this, and again, it can be mentally exhausting. Sometimes after a couple hours, I just don't have the attention span to do this nonstop. Even I sometimes take a break, pull out my phone and check my email or check out the score in the game, and I take some breaks. But as much as I can, I'm constantly watching the action, praying that the hand gets to showdown. And when it does, I go back and I mentally replay the entire hand from each player's perspective, now knowing what 2 cards they were holding the entire time. And then, of course, extrapolating from that. If you continually put in this type of work at the poker table, then you will know your opponents, and you will be the most prepared going into battle. So what's next? In our next tutorial, we'll be talking about elasticity. It's kind of an extension on this idea of getting inside your opponent's heads. And as always, you can find this video and all of our videos, and you can also download our poker app and play poker at hobnob.games. I will see you next time.